My mother-in-law kidnapped my baby to give her to my infertile sister-in-law, claiming I'm an unfit mother, how it traumatized my family and tested my marriage. I, 28 female, have been married to my husband, 29 male, for 4 years. We met through a common friend and started dating 6 years back, and after 2 years of dating, we believed that it was finally time to get hitched. A little over a year ago, I found out that I was pregnant, and 4 months back, I gave birth to my daughter. Everything was perfect, our families got along well, and my in-laws seemed to really like me too. My sister-in-law, 25 female in particular, was very close to me, and we would go out for brunch almost every other weekend. She'd been married for 2 years and had been trying for a baby for almost a year, but with no such luck. So, when my husband and I got pregnant without even intending to, she got herself checked and found out that she was infertile. We felt terrible for her and tried to be low-key about the baby and the pregnancy whenever we were around her, but it was she who would take an interest in it. She told me that she was happy for me and her brother, so we didn't need to downplay our excitement around her, as that would only make her feel guilty. Her husband was very supportive of her throughout, and so were we, because she'd always been a sweet person, and it sucked that she wouldn't get to experience pregnancy, especially when she'd been trying for so long. We tried our very best to be nice to her because she was suffering, and she seemed to be okay with us as well. I've been staying at home with our daughter since I'm on maternity leave, but my husband's company, unfortunately, does not offer paternity leave, so he still has to go out for work. It's difficult to do everything by myself, so I've been looking into nannies because I thought it would be a good idea to start phasing my daughter into it for when I eventually have to go back to work. In the meantime, since I haven't found a nanny yet, I sometimes used to ask for help from either my mother-in-law or my mother. If my mother wasn't available, then my mother-in-law and vice versa. I've always had a good relationship with my mother-in-law and didn't think that inviting her to my house to watch her granddaughter for some time was anything out of the ordinary, and my husband was okay with it too. But that was until 3 days ago, when my mother-in-law did something literally psychotic. Last week, my husband left for a business trip that he returned from only yesterday. On this particular day, I was in the shower, and I left her with the baby in the living room. But when I was done showering and came out to check on my daughter, I realized that the house was empty, and my mother-in-law was nowhere to be seen. Neither was my daughter. So, in a state of panic, I called her up to ask if they'd gone out for a walk, but she declined my call and instead sent me a text saying that she decided to take my baby away so that the more deserving woman could have a baby instead, referring to my sister-in-law. The message also stated that she didn't believe I was competent enough to be a mother in the first place, and that the universe had probably made a mistake by letting me get pregnant and making my sister-in-law infertile. But she was going to correct that mistake herself. She said that I was no good as a mother, so she was giving away my daughter to her daughter because apparently she deserved a baby more than I did. I was livid that she had done such a thing and instantly called the police to report what had just happened. I still remember literally shivering, even though it was summer, because I was terrified of what would become of my daughter, and I kept kicking myself for letting my mother-in-law watch her. I told the cops to get to my sister-in-law's house directly because that's where I suspected my daughter would be, and even drove myself there. But we didn't find either of them. Then we decided to go to my mother-in-law's house, where I found my father-in-law looking absolutely lost when he saw the police car behind me. I tried to explain the situation to him as quickly as I could and asked him if he knew anything that could help us locate them. Luckily, my father-in-law came to the rescue and told me that he had overheard his wife speaking to his daughter on the phone about a hotel nearby, but she had refused to elaborate when he'd asked her about it. He hadn't thought much of it at the time, but when we asked him, he recollected the name of the hotel and even led us there. We found my mother-in-law and sister-in-law hiding out there with my baby. They were screaming and cursing at me even as they were being placed under arrest. It was insane to think that I'd ever let these women into my life and my home. I don't know what their plan was, probably to hide out in the hotel for a few days and then leave. I don't care anymore either. All that matters to me is that I have my daughter back. I was really glad that my father-in-law chose to help me despite being well aware of the repercussions. He knew that his wife and daughter would definitely be facing time for what they did because it was literally kidnapping. But he chose to help me and lead me to the hotel. He could have withheld that information if he wanted to save his wife and daughter, but he didn't, and I'm so incredibly thankful for it. I called my husband up immediately after I got my daughter back, drove home, and told him what had happened. I didn't spare any details. After I was done, he was silent for a while and then told me that he'd talk to me once he came back home and would take the next available flight. But due to a storm, he wasn't able to come back until yesterday. I did think his reaction was really weird, but didn't say much since it was, after all, his mother and sister who had done something so horrible. And, of course, he needed time to process things. But yesterday, he came back home, and he was really quiet the entire time. Finally, not being able to take it anymore, I ended up asking him if he had anything to say at all about what happened. I just couldn't tolerate the silence any longer. And I guess I shouldn't have asked at all because he told me that the first thing he did after his flight landed here was to go to the prison where his mother and sister were, being held, awaiting trial. He told me that he was devastated after he'd spoken to his mother and couldn't even bring himself to believe that something of that sort had happened. His mother had been sobbing while explaining to him that whatever she and her daughter had done was out of grief and that they regretted it. She was practically begging him to help her out of this place because she'd realized her mistake and was ready to do whatever it took to make things right. He told me that he was shattered and broke down right in front of me because he'd never expected his mother or sister to do something so awful, and he was finding it difficult to come to terms with all of this. And now, here's where I might have been the a-hole. Instead of comforting him, I lost my cool and snapped at him because I was furious that, instead of coming back home to his family, the first thing he did after he landed was visit the kidnappers and criminals instead. I told him that his mother had just been crying crocodile tears for his sympathy and that he'd fallen for her act just like she'd wanted him to, and was even feeling bad for her. I told him that if he wanted to sympathize with his mother and sister, then he was welcome to do that. But he shouldn't tell me about it and expect me to feel sorry for him when it was actually me who had gone through the most traumatic experience of my life while he wasn't there. Instead of checking on me and asking how I was doing, he had visited his mother to check on her instead and was now crying about what they were going through, instead of showing concern for his wife and daughter. I must have yelled at him for about half an hour and he just kept looking at me without a word, waiting for me to finish. Once I was done screaming at him, he finally spoke and told me that the reason he didn't come straight home from the airport was because he already knew we were fine at home. The reason he visited his mother and sister first was because he himself had been going through a lot while stuck in another city, knowing his family was dealing with something like this. He told me that I didn't seem to care about how he'd been feeling either. He told me he'd felt helpless because he couldn't come back on time to be there for us, but I didn't ask him about it. Even now, when he was trying to share his feelings with me, I was screaming at him and invalidating them. I felt horrible that I had let these women enter my home and be a part of my and my daughter's life because I thought I knew them, as they had been a part of my life for a couple of years. Then he told me to think for a second about how betrayed and lost he was feeling now that his own family, people he'd known his entire life, had chosen to put me and his daughter through something so unimaginable. He did apologize for not visiting us first and being insensitive, but he also wanted me to apologize for what I said and for making him feel worse about everything. I was really angry, so I told him that I wasn't sorry for anything that I said and doubled down on it. I told him that his mother had manipulated him into thinking she was actually sorry for what she did with her fake tears, and he was falling for it too. He tried to tell me that wasn't the truth, and that this fight wasn't even about what his mother did, but about the way the two of us had failed to think of the other person first and were only thinking about our own feelings. At the time, I was just too furious to see his point, so I refused to apologize and kept insisting that he was in the wrong. This went on for a while until my daughter woke up because of all the fighting, and he left the room to attend to her. He didn't come back out to the living room where we'd been, and I guessed that he must have laid down in the bedroom instead after putting our daughter to sleep. So I chose to sleep on the couch out of spite. Around midnight, about an hour after our big fight, he came by to ask me not to sleep on the couch and to come sleep on the bed, reminding me that I had some trouble with my back. But I told him I was fine sleeping here, again, out of spite. He even offered to switch places with me, but I refused, and eventually, he gave up. I could hear him crying late into the night in the bedroom because the couch was close to our bedroom door, and I kept feeling awful about what had happened. But I also didn't want to apologize either. I did fall asleep eventually, and when I woke up this morning, it was my husband who woke me up since he was ready to leave for work. As soon as I sat up, he left without even saying goodbye, nor did he look back at me. Now that my anger has dissipated a little, I feel really guilty for how I treated him. I'm very hormonal right now, and the smallest things are enough to push me off the edge. What happened with my mother-in-law and sister-in-law was something really big, so needless to say, I'm very overly emotional. But I also do see my husband's point now. I've tried to think about how I'd have felt if I were in his place, stuck in another city, and I found out that my own mother and sister had tried to kidnap my baby. I wouldn't know how to act either. I'm still miffed that he chose to visit his mother before us, but he did apologize for that. I honestly don't know if what he did was acceptable or if I overreacted. And I need to know if I should apologize for how I behaved because I'm afraid that I really did hurt him. Update 1. So, I decided to apologize for reacting the way I did, like most people here believed I should. Both of us were wrong. His decision to visit his mother and sister first was wrong, but my decision to yell at him and invalidate his feelings was pretty messed up as well. Both of us were being selfish, like my husband had said, and we owed each other a huge apology. Once I went through the comments on my original post, I had some clarity on the situation because of everyone's fresh perspective. And yes, it's true, I did take things a tad bit too far with the yelling. We didn't say anything to each other the whole day yesterday, and we didn't speak this morning either. But toward noon, I decided that I wanted to make things right and spent the afternoon buying party supplies to apologize to my husband for whatever happened. It was also a nice little outing for me and my daughter, so it was a win-win situation altogether. My husband was pretty surprised when he came back home and broke down into tears again when he saw the "I'm sorry" cake that I'd bought for him. I ended up crying along with him because this was the longest we'd gone without speaking to each other, and it sucked. I didn't want to live a life without my husband because no matter what happens, I really, truly, sincerely love him. And I definitely wasn't about to let a misunderstanding regarding my mother-in-law get in the way of our otherwise happy marriage. So, we decided to have a serious conversation about our feelings once we were done with our teary reconciliation to get this out of the way once and for all. I told him that I was disappointed that he had chosen to meet his mother and sister before us, and that I thought he should have come back home first. I could understand that he felt betrayed by them and needed closure or whatever, but even then, we were his family now. We were the family he'd actually chosen to have, so he owed this to us. He agreed with me and apologized for what he'd done. He explained that he hadn't been thinking straight ever since I told him the news about what they had tried to do. And those 2 days that he'd spent stuck in the hotel because of the storm had left him feeling even more confused, which led to him making a really stupid decision. He did regret it. He also explained to me that his conversation with his mother hadn't made him feel sorry for her, and if anything, it just made him feel frustrated with how his family had turned out to be. He'd been very upset that I'd accused him of letting his mother manipulate him with her tears because, for him, nothing came above the safety and well-being of his family. And he'd never compromise on that, not even for his own mother's sake. He also felt disappointed that I had started yelling at him when he was at his lowest instead of trying to understand where he was coming from. I had made matters worse by refusing to acknowledge my behavior. So, I apologized for what I'd done as well. As of now, there's peace in our household since we're both back on good terms. We've both been kind of selfish, and that's what had led to this huge fight. But of course, we're on the same team, and that's how it'll always be. On a slightly different note, a lot of people have been asking how my father-in-law has been doing. He's doing just fine. I'm checking up on him regularly and calling him every day. I've also been in touch with his next-door neighbor so that I can keep tabs on him because this is obviously something devastating that he's going through. My sister-in-law's husband has filed for divorce after he found out what she tried to do. So, that's how things have turned out for them. I can't say I feel sorry for them because I just don't. They deserve every bit of this, and I'm glad that it's happening to them now. Update 2. Hi everyone, it's been 2 weeks since my last update, and things have been pretty smooth sailing for my husband and me since then. He switched to working from home, and we have put the whole nanny idea on hold for now because neither of us is willing to leave our baby alone with anyone other than each other right now. I'm feeling very paranoid and edgy still, so I think working from home is our best bet for now. We've also been visiting our father-in-law regularly to check on him. I won't say he's doing well because he seems really distressed and upset all the time, but that's only natural given the circumstances. I feel really bad for him because, had it not been for his help, I might not have been able to find my daughter on time. We also haven't been able to speak to my sister-in-law's husband since he's gone completely MIA after announcing his decision to file for divorce. We've tried to get in touch with him several times but have only been met with silence. It's slightly worrying, but we're trying our best to keep in touch with everyone who has been affected by this. My mother-in-law and sister-in-law are still imprisoned and awaiting trial, but none of us has been to see them yet. Of course, I'm not going to see them at all because what they did was really unforgivable in my opinion. I'd prefer for my husband to not visit them either, but if he chooses to go see them then, well, I don't know how I'd feel about that. Things have been smooth sailing for us at home, but there are still a lot of things that are unsaid, and sometimes I do find my husband looking off into the distance sadly. I worry that he's having a hard time processing this incident, and that he's trying to push it further down so that he doesn't have to think about it. My husband is not a very emotional man, and that time 2 weeks back when we were fighting was probably the most emotional he's ever shown. But in general, he has a tendency to just keep bottling things up until eventually he has a breakdown over something trivial. It's happened a couple of times before, and every time it does, he's an emotional wreck for the next few days. I've tried to push him to seek help for it and learn how to deal with his emotions, but he insists that he's fine. I just don't want him to suppress his feelings this time around as well because what has happened is pretty significant to say the least. If he has a breakdown over this, then it definitely won't be a small one, or one that he'd be able to move on from easily. I want to talk to him about how he's feeling, and I've tried, but he dismisses it, saying that he'll be fine. but I know him, and I know he won't be fine. I need a way to talk to him about this without being insensitive. So, any advice about how to deal with this is welcome. Update 3. Okay, I took the advice that most people here gave me and decided to just rip off the Band-Aid. I couldn't afford to let him spiral and suffocate by himself, and I absolutely needed to talk to him before his mental health got worse. So, last night, after we put our daughter to sleep, I decided to confront him and talk to him about how he'd been feeling. He couldn't just keep running away from his feelings and hoping that he'd be able to leave them behind somehow. He was resistant at first and tried to dismiss my concerns yet again, but I told him that he needed to talk to me and verbalize his emotions, or else he'd be trapped in his own head, and that's as unhealthy as it gets. He went quiet for a while, and I waited for him patiently to start talking. About 3 minutes and a few deep breaths later, he told me that he'd been feeling numb for the past few weeks. Ever since he found out about what his mother had tried to do, he'd felt a whirlwind of emotions. Initially, he'd felt it all, from anger to frustration to betrayal to sadness. Even while we were fighting, he was in constant emotional turmoil. But now that all of that was done with and some time had passed, all his feelings had been replaced by this vacuum. Spending time with us made it a little more tolerable, but he was still struggling to make sense of things. He couldn't believe that his mother, a woman he'd loved and admired his entire life, had attempted to do something so extreme. He also couldn't believe that his little sister, despite all the love and affection he'd showered her with throughout his life, had tried to abduct their baby. He'd always been close to his family, but he'd made up his mind, nevertheless, that he was never going to see any of them again. Also, the fact that he hadn't been here for us when it happened was making him feel really guilty. He said that maybe it was because of this incident that he'd begun to feel really empty and useless. After he was done, I had tears in my eyes because my husband had been so strong for so long. I didn't speak much but told him that he needed to talk to a professional to deal with this adequately, and for the first time, he agreed to it. We hugged for like 10 minutes after that and then went to sleep. We've started looking for a mental health professional near us already, and I'm also planning to speak to my father-in-law soon enough regarding this because I truly want the best for both of these wonderful men. I just really hope things get better for us in the future.